Chapter 16. The Masked Man of Pinocchio Prison. Pinocchio Prison had just been restored following the Enchantress's vicious attacks when it was faced with yet another threat. Like a swift bolt of lightning, the Grand Army charged toward the fortress in early hours of the morning and unleashed the full power of its 19th century artillery. The heavy spiked front doors of the prison were blasted to smithereens by the army's cannons. Only 200 enchanted wooden soldiers guarded the prisoners inside, and they were no match for the thousands of Frenchmen invading the prison. The Grand Army forced its way inside, and the wooden soldiers were blown into pieces by volleys of rifle fire. After the wooden soldiers were completely obliterated and the smoke began to clear, General Marquis stepped into the prison and had a look of its newest conquest. Pinocchio Prison was 30 stories high and open to the inside like a cylinder. From the center of the ground floor, the general could see floor after floor various creatures locked in their cells above them. The prisoners were a rowdy bunch consisting of ogres, witches, trolls, goblins, elves, animals, men, and women alike. Some welcomed the French soldiers who had destroyed the wooden guards by banging their chains against the bars of their cells. Others cowered and feared, afraid they would be targeted next. Nothing was known about these intruders. They spoke and dressed differently from anyone the prisoners had ever seen. Judging by their weapons, the prisoners could only assume these men were soldiers of very dark magic. The remains of the wooden soldiers were piled in the center of the prison. Many pieces, such as the legs and hands, still twitched. The general poured lamp oil on the pile on the fallen and lit it on fire so the prisoners above could watch the guards who had held them captive burn. General Marquis circled the flames and hush fell over the prison. "Good morning," the general said in the prisoners above. "I am General Marquis of the Grand Army of the French Empire. I am certain many of you had never heard of the Empire and its army before, so I would like to change that now. Where we come from, we are known as the greatest military forces in history. We have dominated every territory in our path and have defeated every nation that stood in our way, and now we have come to your world to claim it as our own." The prisoners grew uncomfortable in his presence. The general didn't need to say anything further to convince them that he was a cunning and powerful man. They could sense it. "Where we come from, we have a phrase," the general continued. "The enemy of my enemy is my friend, we say. Today, I would like to give each of you a chance to make friends with the Grand Army. We offer you a chance to join our conquest and be cleared of your crimes. Help us fight against the people who imprisoned you. Help us seize the world in the name of France and become part of the French Empire." The majority of prisoners cheered at what he was offering. "Or you could stay here and rot as intended," the general said. "The choice is yours." The prisoners roared with delight. Anything was better than spending another day in the prison, even joining an army. Finally, they could experience the freedom and revenge they had only dreamed about. Colonel Batten, along with Captain Delane and Lieutenant Rampart, recruited the criminals one cell at a time. The inmates were given options of pledging their alliance to the French Empire or remain locked in their cell. All the general's pleasures, almost all the prisoners waited with bated breath to pledge their alliance and be freed from their cells. Only one prisoner gave the commander an answer they weren't expecting. His cell was the very top of the prison, and he supplied them with a message for the general that was too enticing to ignore. "General Marquis," Colonel Batten said, "this is a prisoner who wishes to speak with you, sir." The general was irritated. Batten would have brought him such a request. "And what makes this man worthy of my time?" "He wishes to help you," Batten said, "and he says without his help you cannot conquer the entire world." Hearing the prisoner's message infuriated the general. Who would dare be so bold to give General Jacques Marquis an ultimatum? But the general was so determined in his quest for domination, he allowed his curiosity to outweigh his ego. He decided to speak with the prisoner and see if he had anything worthwhile to contribute. Ban led the general to the very top of the prison and showed him the cell of the daring man. A large plaque displayed on the wall beside his cell read, "The Masked Man, sentenced to life in Pinocchio prison for an attempted robbery of the fairy godmother." The general peered into the cell to see the prisoner for himself. The masked man was very tall but frail. He wore a tattered suit, and his tie was torn in half. A gray sack over his head concealed his face. Holes were cut around his eyes and mouth. "You the masked man, I take it?" the general asked. "Hello, General," he said. "I thoroughly enjoyed your speech down there. Boy, you sure know how to make an entrance. Did they teach you that in military training?" The general glared at this ridiculous man. "I do not have time for games," he said. "Make sure this man stays in his cell." The general stormed off, but the masked man desperately reached for him, though through his bars, and dragged him to stay. "No, wait, General," he pleaded. "I apologize. I didn't mean to offend you. I'm only trying to help you. I have information that will lead you to a certain victory." On this, the general turned on his heel and faced the prisoner. "And how can a man like you possibly help a man like me?" "Because you're not from this world, and I am," the masked man said. "I know my way around it and how it operates. You have a very impressive army, but that won't be enough to take over. You're going to need something bigger, something much more powerful if you're going to stand up to the fairies. And I know where you can get it." The general took a step closer to the man. His interest sparked all through, although his face didn't show it. "You have 2 minutes of my time," he said. "Explain yourself." The masked man rubbed his hands together and began. He was a very odd and animated man, and used lots of hand gestures as he spoke, most of which didn't go along with what he said. It was like his hands and mouth were describing two different things. "The first thing you should know about this world is its history," he said. "The past is divided into 3 ages: the Dragon Age, the Age of Magic, and the Golden Age. What we're living in now, hundreds of years ago during the Dragon Age, this world was a mess. It was filled with tyrant kings and evil sorcerers, and obviously dragons. Lots and lots of dragons. They are nearly unstoppable and reproduce like rabbits." "What value does this history lesson have to me?" the general asked. He was starting to feel like his time was being wasted, and it angered him. "I'm getting there, General," the masked man assured him. "Like I was saying, there were dragons everywhere destroying everything. Then the fairies got together and put a stop to them. That's how they came to power, and the world entered the Age of Magic. They formed the Happily Ever Assembly, and there was peace on Earth, and yada yada yada. Now the fairy godmother, the head of the assembly, and her fairies had been in charge since the dragons went extinct. And no one has been able to overthrow them because..." He was hoping the general would play along to finish his sentence, but Marcus didn't break his stoic expression. "Dragons," the masked man said with mystical hand gestures. "No one has been able to overthrow the fairies because you need a dragon, and I know where you can get one." General Marcus had expected his eyes to lift, his left eye to start twitching from the moment the masked man started speaking, but it didn't. There must have been some truth to what he was saying. "So where do we get this dragon?" the general asked. The masked man dropped his hands. An equally serious expression grew on his face. "Let me get out of the cell first, and then I'll show you." General Marcus was impressed by the masked man's quick and calculated scheme, but he figured there was much more to this man than meet the eye. He wanted to know more about him before unlocking the door of his cell. "How long have you been in this prison?" he asked. "A decade," the masked man said. "And why were you sentenced to life for attempted burglary?" the general pressed. "Surely, even in this world, that's an awfully harsh punishment for such a little crime." The masked man lowered his head shamefully, not for committing the crime, but for failing to accomplish it. "It was what I was trying to steal that cemented the sentence," he said, and then looked to the general's eyes. "You and I are very similar men, General." We know an opportunity when we see one. Otherwise, neither of us would be standing here now. There was eagerness in the madman's pale blue eyes, but the general found it alluring. Perhaps this man could be of service after all. One last question, the general said. Why do you wear that bag over your head? The masked man smiled coyly. The same reason why you wear that uniform, he said. To cover something I don't want the rest of the world to see. Normally a statement like this world outraged the general, but this time it made him smile. The masked man was a strange man, but he was one of few the general could identify with. Colonel Batten, General Marcus ordered, remove this man from his cell. As soon as we leave the prisoner, we will organize a traveling party, and he will guide us to a dragon. Alright, that is the end of chapter 16. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to hear more from the latest stories of Grimm and more books to come. If you liked the video, make sure you give this video a thumbs up. And if you also have any good recommendations for me to read later on, don't forget to comment below with those recommendations. But overall, I hope you have a wonderful day and hope you enjoy the read. Bye!